Hi, everyone. I'm Blaine Birch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun, and your host here at Turning Point, stories and strategies from the world of business. And joining me today is Dave Bodnarchuk, president of ElectionBuddy and FCPA and FCA. You can explain what those acronyms mean, Dave.
Sure. Yeah. No, just worked hard to get an accounting designation. So it's helped me in my career a long time, both as an entrepreneur and on an ongoing basis. So it stands for Fellow of the Chartered Professional Accountants, and the old designation was Fellow of the Chartered Accountants. So yeah, that's kind of the background. Like,
oh, you did mention that to me a little bit before, but I actually wanted to hear a little bit about it because I'm not familiar with the term, and it interesting. It's a nice higher level CPA, and of course here at Dryrun we're dealing with CPAs every day. So any information I can get about that, I'm always intrigued by. It's always helpful. And then if I run into it again, then I know what I'm looking at. Anyway, thanks for joining me today, Dave. We have known each other for quite a number of years now, and I'm the reason that I was so excited to have you on the show was not just sort of your background and kind of moving from a CPA, but now into sort of the software world and product world, but, and we will get there later in the show, but how you've gained traction with something that is so tailor-made for this massive COVID-driven move onto the web. And so it's a really exciting story. And as we were talking a little bit earlier before we popped on the show, I was talking about what we see not only with Dryrun, but as we're talking with our accounting partners is unfortunately over half the businesses are struggling absolutely mightily with less than half their regular revenue. There's a lot in the middle that are really struggling, and then there's these ones at the top that have are kind of hitting it out of the park and helping a lot of people in this new world. And you're one of them, helping them with a problem that is really difficult to deal with, but is tailor-made for this sort of new world and how everyone has to live today. So we're going to move up to ElectionBuddy a little bit later in the show. But before we get there, I want to start looking at the journey of how you move from a CPA all the way up to today, where you've got lightning in a bottle with a software company. Where did you get started in a business, Dave?
well, the fun part about it is my credo started right in university. I was heavily involved with Apple technologies as a university student. I got hired by Apple while I was in university, and was helping evangelize some of their technologies around campus, and simply got hired because somebody said that you couldn't do a Canadian payroll program on a Macintosh. So I built one. It was literally that simple. And Apple kind of heard about it a little bit and got hired to help them out, and always liked the technology aspect of it. And while I was, one of my mentors said it would be a good idea if I wanted to learn about business to learn about accounting. And my dad always wanted to avoid's not the right term. He wanted to pay as little taxes as possible. So between those two things, that got me into the CPA journey. And while I was doing that journey, I basically built my very first company to do employment application forms on the old 800K floppy disks to university students, because it wasn't just accountants that were having to fill out these forms to apply for accounting articling positions, but many of the professionals like engineers. There was something called the Access Employment Form. That was really my second foray into entrepreneurism, because in the summer times while I was in university, I was doing small business consulting, like installing Apple Macintosh, all probably because my dad, because he said, like, you got a choice. We can split a truck, or I'll buy you a computer. And I took the truck option. He said, I'm getting you the computer anyway. And that got me my first Mac and kind of really set me for kind of my career. So, been involved with Apple, did my articles at KPMG, and then went on to work at Oracle for 7 years, and then went back to the entrepreneurial roots back in 2001, wanting to get an online registration service out of my system, and pivoted a couple of times, and then eventually divested of that company back in 2018. And now I'm focused on ElectionBuddy today.
So let's, you skipped forward about 25 years there in about 3 seconds. So I'm going to force you to dive into a little bit of that early on.
Sure.
So you're a CPA, you're CPA trained, yet you're making software in university. Were you self-taught at that point? Like when you made that payroll program?
Honestly, my dad was, and my family, we were always kind of figure out how to get things done. So it was very simple, right? Like people needed help with, at that time, people were just trying to figure out how to put computers in their office. Small businesses were. So, and a
Yeah.
Macintosh was pretty self-sufficient. You could kind of do it, and you get some young guy like me showing you how to use something like, at the time it was called Bedford Simply Accounting, right? To install that, to put accounting records on. So for me, it was a natural fit. And, working with Apple, I learned a lot. Oracle was uh, kind of building on the designation. And I quite like being in public practice accounting. I get to talk to many, many different kinds of businesses. I learned about business all the way through. And it was a great place to work. And the people that I worked with were super smart. And I've been fortunate to be around that for the majority of my career, which I like too, which you can kind of build on in technology as well. But ultimately there's that entrepreneurial itch, and it was always about kind of figuring out how to help people and solve problems. And that, for me, it's so, people call me an entrepreneur, but I'm kind of more like a software guy, I think, right? Like, because I've been involved with software and SaaS and technology for the last 20 years, and technology for my entire career, except for the articling stint at KPMG, right? So, for me, it's just kind of in my bones, I think.
What, so you're at KPMG, you're articling there, and then instead of going the accounting, like, public firm route or whatever, you went to Oracle. What drew you to Oracle, and what did you do at Oracle?
Well, I was recruited by Oracle. At the time, they were my boss at the time. He saw a really big opportunity because he was hearing rumblings, and the entire industry was hearing rumblings about back in even '94 about the Y2K problem and how accounting systems were going to fail. So, he was trying to build out an applications division in Canada. We didn't have one. I was one of the, we'd kind of had a bit of a foray, but no dedicated division to kind of, like, for the financials. SAP was really, really dominant at that point in time, and PeopleSoft was kind of an up and comer. And so when these guys came and talked to me, it's like, well, yeah, I know a little bit about Oracle, and they were one floor up from me. So it was an easy transition moving from KPMG to Oracle, because it was just literally one floor up. And it was, when the folks that I met, it was a very intense sales culture. It was very fast moving, and it was very different from accounting, but there was still a lot of smart people and a lot of interesting folks. I was something called at the time, a pre-sales consultant. So I would help, there was salespeople, and I would help, get into some of the technical aspects, the accounting around the software, to explain the features, folks, but not from a pure sales perspective. It was more like making sure that the debits equal the credits, doing mini implementations. I got to help out with product development to a certain extent too. There was always something new, and Oracle was very, very entrepreneurial at that time. And it was an interesting place to work, for sure.
So you went from Oracle, you said you're there 7 years, and then you had to scratch an entrepreneurial itch. What was it that made you go back to this? You obviously had an entrepreneurial spirit, early days or university days. What prompted you to take that leap, and I guess, like, now, never look back?
Just the itch kind of thing. There was, Y2K had ended. We had seen some downturn, and the dot-com bubble had ended, and there was changes, right? So from that perspective, it was a great time to start a business. And there were some other people that were making changes, kind of rounded up a little bit of a team, and we kind of got started. And as I tell folks, I think I've made every mistake in those first 5 years. If there was a mistake to be made, I didn't make a ton of them prior to that. But for those first 5 years in that entrepreneurial piece, I think I made every one and under the sun. And as I tell folks, I would have fired me 5 or 6 times over going through that process until about 2007, until we got some wings and made some changes and really started to get it. But there was lots of external situations that I had to deal with, lots of internal things, lots of mistakes that I made. And ultimately, we were trying to build something that allowed people to do online registration, and over the years kind of pivoted a little bit to really focus on K-12 schools and develop a niche, because we didn't, unlike for those folks that have heard of Eventbrite, I didn't have $50 million in seed money or seed capital to kind of grow it. I wasn't coming from a PayPal background or had those connections in the Valley. It was just like, there was a problem, I wanted to solve it, and I was going to do it with my own bank account. So that's kind of how it worked.
It's probably a familiar circumstance to entrepreneurs that, you learn through failure, you learn through mistakes, uh, I can relate to the, for years, somehow it feels like everything you do is wrong and you learn from it. The fact is though, is that most businesses don't make it past the first, definitely first 5 years. And a big chunk of them don't make it past their first year. So, you did a lot of right things, right? You did a lot of things well and hung in there and learned and we're able to parlay that into the next thing. Tell me a little bit about some of the experiences of that sort of first endeavor into software. And it's not, not so much on the software itself. It's like, yeah, it's just, lots of different pieces of software, but how did you, I guess, identify the issue, the problem that you wanted to solve? And like you mentioned, you kind of had a little bit of a pivot along the way. What was a little bit of that story where you found the problem and then had to adjust that direction a bit?
Yeah. So for me, for my entire career, it's all been about leverage, taking one idea and changing it a little bit and making it a little bit better. Started out with that employment form and said, well, why does it have to be just for an employment form? In 2001, let's do it put it on the web and do registration for anything, right? And then, in going through some of those trials and tribulations, we developed something that we kind of did fully on the web, but it was a lot of technology and we weren't sure the business problem we were solving. And then so we said, look, we got to focus back on the business problem solving, do it with a little bit of a different team. And then we kind of did it in there was a client side or a desktop portion of it, and then a web portion of it. Well, that made it really hard to put into the kinds of organizations that we wanted to put into. So we went back to the technology had matured a little bit, went back to the web, and then really started to develop something that had a bunch of legs in terms of the usability, except the name wasn't quite right. So I tell folks about the story about going from Event IQ, which people were saying to be Eventique, because so you weren't getting that name and recognition, to calling it Scoochie because it was supposed to be cute, under 40 office administrators that were using it. This little guy with running shoes, this little puffy ball guy, and they loved it, except, as I found out after going to a conference, that in a Sicilian dialect, it meant sister of a whore. And also from the urban slang dictionary, that it was a skank hoochie. So, and one of our big customers said, look, I love your product, but I can't brand around it. Like, we can't have this and a thing. So like anything, you get a good enough size deal, you figure out how to change the name. So we did to InviteRight, which is simple and clean. People could see what it said. And, people ask me what's in a name. And as I say, every mistake that I've made in names, so when we got to ElectionBuddy, there was lots of different things, it was a name that I had effectively acquired, but it fit all the bill, right? Like it wasn't an issue of, with Event IQ, it didn't look like Eventique. When you saw it in a URL or on a web thing, you could say it, and it had the right thing. You didn't have an S in it, so it wasn't events or something, or EventerRight or InviteRight or any of that kind of stuff. When people saw it, they could translate it, and to me that's a pretty important thing. I tell folks that one of the big reasons why I think Right Labs got acquired was because we did a good job with the brand. But that was after a lot of learning, like InviteRight, ActivityRight, CampusRight, translating into the overall Right Labs, getting rid of the Event IQ and having that overall dominant brand with the cascading products underneath that. I think that worked out well. But again, that was after a lot of lessons learned and, taking advantage of some really smart people on the branding side to figure out how we were going to put it all together, right? And I've been really fortunate to have some really, really, really smart people and good people along the way, both in the Edmonton and in the community worldwide, and guys that you'll have talked to and known, part of the A100 that I'm a part of now, and certainly, a bunch of those guys, they were very helpful along the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it is like just when you start talking about a name, I go back to because we've made over the years, I've a number of different products and things, and Dryrun's the first one that's really getting some traction in that. And I just thinking back to the the long, drawn out, painful process. To come up with the name, the brand, the overall, the messaging, everything for Dryrun, how challenging it was, and how challenging it still is, to get that right, because it is so key. It's that messaging and people understanding what you do, right? Tell me a little bit about because you went from this Event IQ, and then you just sort of said Right Labs, and you talked about a number of products there. What was, that sounds like a change from just this sort of event-based registration. What did that move into by the time you sold Right Labs?
So basically what happened is we were going after office administrators when we flipped from, started out to be Event IQ, went to Scoochie, changed to Invite Right, and then started to get a little bit of work on the university side, some little bit of work on the K-12 side, and a lot of work on the K-12 side, but we're dealing with office event planners. That's who we were kind of targeting, right? As opposed to professional event planners, we were going after the office. But the problem is that in 2008, if you remember the financial service crisis, we were doing some work with some banks, some credit unions, and they basically said, look, we're not buying you. So I had literally 12 months worth of runway kind of left, because they had paid for their accounts up here. We had some annual accounts, and it was like, I was either going to find some other customers or die. And, I got really lucky because I had done some seminars with Nate, just talking about technology for some of their event students. One of those folks was working for the Edmonton Northlands at the time at the Edmonton Expo Center. And they said, look, we've got a school that has a problem selling tickets, and there's a bunch of these folks that do graduations. Well, why don't you go out and talk to them? Because, I remember you from the thing, you got some good stuff. We'd seen it. We tried it with this other guy and it didn't work out so well. So why don't you go and talk to him? So I did. And it was a guy out at Spruce Grove Comp. We had an idea that from another friend of mine who was running a company, a construction company here locally, and he ended up being the CFO of PCL. And he wanted to do for his Christmas party, sitting people, just kind of like pick your seats on a plane. So after talking to him, it's like, hey, that's a pretty good idea. So when I went into that school meeting, it turned out that was the real problem that they were having. So I had an idea on how to solve that. We structured a deal that said, look, we'll put this together. We haven't built it yet, but we'll put it together for you. And if it works, then you pay. And they were so intrigued by the idea that they started talking to other schools even before we had built it, right? And, people give software companies a hard time about selling vaporware. Well, this is the first time I'd seen where the customer was selling, an idea. The software wasn't there. So I figured we were kind of onto something. So we focused on that. And we just said, look, we're going to try and be the best in the world at graduation ticketing. And we focused specifically on that. And then in doing so, we started to leverage that customer base for better ideas and really tried to grow that. But it was very cyclical because grads happened kind of in March, April, May, June, right? So we had to figure out what to fill in the background and what we could do to leverage that. And, after 5 years, we started to get some competition in that space as well, specifically on the ticketing, which is why, so we did some extra rebranding. We added to the brand to figure out how to make a bit of a mobile app. And so then we were focusing, because K-12 folks and campus folks tended to have different viewpoints. So we wanted to separate those brands, which is how we got to the Invite Right, Campus Right for the kind of the front end ticketing side, and then building this mobile app called Activity Right at the time. And then figuring out how to lump it all together with Right Labs over the top, which is ultimately all the parts that got divested of.
It's interesting. There's a couple of things, the themes in there that I see from entrepreneurs, quite often. One of them is, you said, you're lucky. You're lucky you met this person, talk with this person. But what I see over and over again with entrepreneurs is they make their own luck, but a lot of it is because we tend to be social with other entrepreneurs, right? And those relationships are really the form of networking. And it's so often that the lucky stroke is because you've met someone, you've developed a relationship, and they trust you, and they hand you off to someone else. And there's a lot of work that goes into that, into the luck.
Well, and it's kind of that, that one of the mentors, the guy that got me into the CA thing, it's kind of like, fortune is where luck meets opportunity, right? And you've got to be, you got to prepare for that to take advantage of the opportunity, which I was fortunate enough to do in a lot of cases, but not everybody gets the opportunity either, right? Like even in the very, figuring out how to solve those problems, growing up in a farming background or whatever, we just had to figure stuff out. The very first time I was doing software with that application form, I went to Costco and bought a vacuum sealer, figured out how to use that vacuum sealer to create shrink wrap, because I didn't have the money to buy a shrink wrap thing. So you just kind of MacGyver it through, for lack of a better term. Hopefully there's no copyright on that. But the whole idea is you're just trying to figure out how to solve a problem. And then if you figure out how to solve enough problems, ultimately there's going to be other problems that you get faced with that you'll have, maybe a little bit differently or in a different sense or a different tack, you'll have solved already. So when that new problem comes in that's really big, one, you recognize it, and two, you're prepared to take advantage of it. In the same way, that even today with the ElectionBuddy or with the Invite Right or with the ticketing or all that stuff, it was, when we started to get some success around graduation, it was like, people say, well, you're an overnight success. And it's like, well, yeah, that took 7 years of preparation to be that overnight success. And so it's really about resilience too, right? Like being able to hang around to just, some people are smarter than I am, and they were able to pivot. Me, I just kind of hung around to be able to take advantage of the opportunity, right?
And that's a common theme. Like you do hear of tech all the time, the 10-year overnight success, right? Like it's very true that part of it is just being the last one standing, hanging around and learning. And even when you're talking about the idea of that luck is sort of meeting opportunity, but looking at opportunity, there's opportunity out there around every single corner. You see it every day. I think one of the things that entrepreneurs do well is they recognize problems. And that's what that opportunity is solving a problem. And where things fail is it's you try and make a problem to solve, but actually recognizing that problem, like you said, it's a very pragmatic approach to life when it's just like, I just got to make that work, right? There's a problem and I'm going to make something to fix it.
And you bring up a good point, right? Like do you adjust your software to solve the problem? Are you trying to force your software to solve the problem? Are you forcing that solution in? And it's iterative, right? Like you may build something sort of solving the problem. You learn from that and you tailor it. And then, for me, some of the biggest decisions that I've had to make is say, look, we're just not solving this the right way. And we're going to take the leap and reinvest and get her done, right? Like that's the toughest, but like one of the toughest decisions that I ever made was, 18 months in, after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own money, to say, this is not going to work. This technology is not going to work. We are not going to solve this problem. So we're done. We're throw it in the garbage. We've learned some stuff. Let's get going. And that's where it becomes difficult. And for me, and what we've done, we've refactored our stuff probably between at minimum, maximum 3 years, sometimes 5-year average, to say, look, now we've got to go on to the next version, because stuff just changes, right? And the team gets smarter, you learn more, the team learns more, everybody's more aware. So is it easier just to fix, or is it easier to say, we're going to build from scratch? And I've done that, 3 or 4 times, and it's always daunting and a little nerve-wracking. I'm getting a little old for that, Blaine.
I can relate. I've made those same, making those, I can vividly, like when you're talking about that, I can literally just picture a few times where I just sitting there, and it's a feeling. I actually remember where I was sitting and everything, but it's the feeling of, holy shit, we have it's because in business, especially with innovation, there are these, it's like swatting mosquitoes. I can't remember which entrepreneur was talking about that one time, about swatting mosquitoes, but there are those times where it's a big one. It's like we have to rebuild. Well, at one time it was like, this prototype we did of Dryrun at first, you're just like, we learned from it. We're not building on it. It's literally going in the trash. And like you said, a lot of money goes down the toilet, but you learn from it. And
Yeah,
let's
well, and
build it again, and it
that
looks
side
kind of the
thing,
same, but it's totally different, right?
and as an entrepreneur, as that, even as a team, you have to have that steadfast resolution that says, look, yeah, we are going to iterate, we are going to make our next one better, and not everybody's up for that. Like,
No.
And that's why I say when you talk about the 10-year overnight success, I had 3 pretty big failures, right? In that, where we not only re-architected but remarketed. The name
Yeah.
thing, like going in, it's a lot of money to brand, and it takes time to get that brand out in the space. Well, I had to do that 3 times because I just wasn't smart enough, and I thought I did it for all the right reasons at the time. So you learn from it. Or the CTO saying, well, man, I look at some of this code that we all built 3 years ago, and it's just off. It's like, well, that's what you knew at that time, so you can't beat yourself up over it. But the big thing is to say, okay, that's where it really becomes interesting for me, is to make that investment, say, yeah, you know what, we're going to take this next step. And that's to me what makes a true entrepreneur, is having that steadfast resolution that you're going to just drive through it and say, yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to get her done. Right.
Yeah. And it's true. And it's like, that's what entrepreneurs face, is I don't think you're going to hear a whole lot of stories where, because everything's logical at the time, right? Everything makes sense at the time. And then you look back and go, what the hell was I thinking? That's just, and as entrepreneurs, I rarely do that. Like, you just kind of, well, shit, that's how you learn. And you're driving forward, and you're driving forward, and you're staying in that game over and over again, staying in the game. And part of it is when you say, like, rebranding those times, that was what ultimately led to success. And those were the right moves at the right time. And so, were they mistakes, or were they really smart moves, right? Probably a little bit of both. Like, that's just the reality for an entrepreneur.
And a little bit of luck too, right? Like, you don't know, you make the educated guess, and it's a calculated risk, but you make the right one and you'll make the wrong one. It's kind of like, the people that you work with, the management team that you build, the software that you choose, or the problem that you're looking to solve. Is that market really, because if everybody knew it, then everybody would do it, right? So it's not as, like, how can you beat yourself up for making an educated guess if you did it all right? Because if you don't try it, well, then you're never going to do anything, and that's no good either, right? Like, it's like, some days it's hard.
Some days, a lot of days are hard, and you have those successes in between that keep you going. But innovation is hard, and it's not the same as, just sort of running a business. You hang up your shingle and you're making money. Innovation is just, it was, my last interview was with Scott Rusnick, and we were talking about, I sort of brought up, I said, entrepreneurship, it isn't a marathon. It's like you're walking around the world. It's like, that's how it's not a marathon. Like, I've said that before, but I realized no. And what I kind of said to him is, like, climbing this, so you feel you're climbing that mountain, you're blooding, you're bruising, you get over just the ledge, and there's the next peak is higher. And it just, that's what it feels like. It's not even, that's an example or whatever. That's just what it feels like. So many days. And you have those little times where you go over the crest and you go, oh man, we made it. You made it to here. Let's just start climbing again. You pat yourself in the back for 30 seconds and you're off again. And it's a slog, right?
Well, and I think that's what gets you through those slogs, is celebrating with your team as well. Like, it's the victories. We've experienced some, I've never, in my career, I've pushed growth. I've never had pure demand. This is pure demand for what we're doing right now, just because of the changing times. And if you don't take some of the times to say congratulations to the team, or celebrate the success, or do that, it does become a slog, right? Like we did for our group, we set a quarterly goal. In our third quarter, the team knocks it out of the park. And so, yeah, it was just a nice little gift that was kind of a stretch gift, but it was really fun to be able to go back and say, well, what kind of Apple Watch do you want? Or what do you want engraved in those iPod Pro headphones, or you know, what do you want for your gift, right? Even some of the very first things, even when we released Event IQ version 1, I took, and some of them have gone to be really successful entrepreneurs too, right? Like we went down to Intuit conference at the time in San Jose, and we went to a place at the time was called Fry's Electronics, and they're still around, but they're not with Amazon and the proliferation of electronic and the transactions, not the same thing. But Fry's back in the day was like the mecca of gadgets and stuff, and I'll never forget it because we were celebrating that success, even though it wasn't as much of a win as we'd wanted, but we were still celebrating the success. The team goes in, and one of the guys comes up and says, what's going on? What's the problem? He says, I can't decide what to buy because there's just so much stuff, right? And those are the kinds of things that you think about as the little bit of the celebration of success that gets you through that slog so that you can get to that next mountain celebrate the success. Plus it's pretty, people, it's an overused and it's trite, but the people that you work with can make or break your experience too, right? Like I'm really fortunate. I've hired some and worked with, and some of them have just come on board, but they're smart and they're fun, and in some ways we're like-minded. We share some core values, and so when it is a slog, it doesn't feel like you're slogging yourself, and it just makes all the difference in the world. And I've been, there's been some really, really good people that I've had the chance to work with throughout the journey. Some of them, with the divestiture, I don't get a chance to talk to near as much as I'd like to, but certainly, doesn't make them any less good people, and they're fantastic, right? So that's also part of what it is, right? It's the journey of the people that you get to work with to solve this really cool problem, or it's really cool that you solve the problem. Sometimes the problem's not as cool, but how you solved it is really cool, right? So that's where it's the part that I like of it anyway.
It's like, as an entrepreneur, I know that's one of the things that I'm always challenged with is stopping and having those small celebrations, because you get into or at least for me, it feels like you get into the rhythm of, it's just a fight. It's a fight every day, and you get used to that fight. And so you have a little win, and it's like, all right, where's the next fight? Like, you're always looking for that next hill to climb over. And it is like, it's something that is really important to try and stop and celebrate those little wins. And it's something, honestly, I don't think I'm as good at doing. But I do agree that it's having the right people is so critical. And like our team at Dryrun here, we've been just so fortunate. And I don't want to say, like, you kind of want to say like we got lucky, but at times, like, well, it's lucky. It's just part of it's luck, but part is we've built the right culture. We found the people that believe in what we're doing, that have the same belief in our kind of vision and our mission and where we want to go and what we want to do. And it's, and there's some excitement there, as challenging as it is, in the startup world, in the tech startup, there is excitement there. And it's, as soon as you said, San Jose to the Intuit conference, it was a little bit of a downer, because this is the first year this month that we're going to miss it in like, 4 years, 5 years, something like that. And I'm not all that thrilled to always get on the plane and do the travel and stuff, but it was always fun going there. And you get to talk with, so many of our friends and our colleagues and all these people that we know from all these other businesses, and going back to our it was 2017 around there. I think it was 2017 where we did our pitch on stage in San Jose, and then we went to Paper Plane, I think was the little restaurant after, and Original Gravity next door, and that was our celebration after sweating it out on stage doing our pitch. And those are
you'll hear those, like, that's
times,
those experiences. That's what everybody will remember. They won't remember the name of the company that won, but they'll remember the name of the restaurant that you went to celebrate. They'll remember when we at Oracle, there was a group of 4 of us that we sold a lot of software in healthcare one year in 1998. And I'll remember the win was great and it was really cool, but I'll remember some of the late night stories with some of the guys that went on to do some really, really interesting things. One went on to Microsoft, one still at Oracle. Another guy went on to Microsoft, and I kind of did the entrepreneurial stuff. But that team of 4, that was pretty special. There were some other folks that helped out a lot too. But I remember the experience of being up for 48 hours straight, finishing an RFP, and driving to Red Deer and pulling over the side of the road because I was so tired and then just about missing the time to get the RFP in, and then thinking, oh my God, what's the team going to think if we miss that? Or one guy, just those are the experiences. And if you can get the right team on board to kind of have some of those fun, but hard work, kind of get things, that's what people remember. They remember the people that, and accomplishing the goal. They won't necessarily remember what the goal was, right? Like that's the,
Yeah.
I find anyway.
That's what I try and I've tried to tell myself when these little the panics or the rough days or whatever, and sometimes you take them so personally at times as an entrepreneur, and like just at your gut, like you just want to succeed. You want your clients to be successful, you want your customer, you want your staff to be successful, and it can really kick you in the gut when things go wrong, and I've started to just tell myself, I'm like, yeah, the feeling is familiar, but I can't for life of me remember the circumstances last time or the time before or the time before. And there are very few times over the last number of years where I actually remember something going, actually, I can't even remember one where it went wrong was probably kept me up for no sleep for a few days going through my head. And, I don't remember the circumstances anymore. I just remember the feeling mostly. And it's a feeling you want to avoid, but it is a reminder when something hits that it's like, you know what, it's probably not fatal. It's probably just a learning lesson. And it's something I'm not great at dealing with still today, but you try.
Everybody goes through it. That's part of one of the great things that I did was back in 15 as I joined a roundtable group called Ace Tech, and I would fly out to Vancouver once a month. And some of the like we still meet quarterly, even though the overall roundtable is kind of busted up and some of the guys have gone in different things. But that group, that was pretty special. And just the ability to circle with other entrepreneurs, right now, today, that's become less like it's harder to do. There's EO, there's YPO, there's a number of, other roundtable forums that are out there. But one thing that I'll say is that, whether it's A100 or, some of that circle, part of it's just to be able to go out and bounce an idea off in full confidence with somebody that's kind of going through some of the same problem. They might, things that you've solved, they haven't solved yet, and things that they've solved, you haven't solved yet. That makes a massive difference too. Like one of the guys is now working with us, right? Like in the thing, and it's, after a five-year relationship, he's like, well, one, I like working with you, but two, I think this is a pretty good opportunity. And it kind of makes sense for everybody. And that's how you grow and you get better and you meet cool people and you learn some stuff and hopefully build better products, right? Like that, all that networking thing it's where we first started, but that really matters too, right?
It really does. Those relationships matter so much. And it's been challenging during this COVID. Like I've done lots of these on Zoom. Part of the reason we have this podcast is so I can get on with friends that are entrepreneurs and chat with them on video, and because it is hard, and that's one of the things I miss so much are those, sitting at a table with one or four entrepreneurs over a beer, and the one thing I know with entrepreneurs is they'll share everything with other entrepreneurs, and you just all feel it. You've all been through it, and you can learn from it. And it's I know early on in Dryrun's life, I spent a lot of time talking with other entrepreneurs and longtime friends that are in industry, and one of the big shifts for me was when I started to bring in, like I have a mentor team through the U of A, and I have advisors, and you start bringing in more people that add into the fold, and there's more sort of color and advice and everything, but there's still, it's never the same as just kind of sitting across the table with another entrepreneur, having a beer and talking about that next challenge. And doing that in person is something I miss, and it's the thing I'm most excited about when hopefully the world goes back to a little bit of normalcy 100%. is that in person, right?
Well, and it was nice even kind of interim between waves to kind of get out, and there's guys that you and I first met in that Advanced Technology Center, and a bunch of guys that are there, that I'm still friends with today, but it was nice to get out in that interim wave and fellow by the name of Mark that we both know, you know, just to have a beer with him or a lunch or kind of catch up a little bit, all that stuff, it matters, right? Because especially if they're of the same, if your companies have grown up about at the same pace and same time, it gets to be pretty busy for everybody. And those kind of reconnections or saying, where you at? For me, it's just like, I learn a ton, right? And people talk about reading books, and I do a ton of that too, and can recommend some really good ones that shaped our company. But certainly you got to do that in conjunction with, you know, you and I sitting down in Phoenix one time, or, you know, the EO group, the round, you know, the forums for them, or the YPO forums, or the ACE Tech roundtables, like all that stuff, being able to do it in conjunction with, you know, having a beer as well as some structure, it helps a lot. It was one of the reasons that I think, you know, for me, that the divestiture occurred kind of thing, is because I had no idea what to expect, but I was getting prepped for that 3 years in advance for when it actually occurred, right? And it made a big difference for me anyway.
Yeah, it's Zoom's great, but it's just not quite the same, unfortunately. And but you know what, like a friend of mine, I was actually on a call with him a couple of weeks ago, and he said, yeah, but can you imagine if this hit like 15 years ago? Because you can't even do this. You can't even have this video. You can't, you know, you're just kind of on the phone, and it would, so there's that side of it, that at least timing wise, there's more tools that we can use to sort of stay connected. And, but you know, I do want to, because I do want to run up to, because we're talking for a while here, up to today, you've now got a product that is just solving a lot of problems and is taking off, and helping people with this situation we're in, where people are working from home and all over the place, and it's so difficult. Tell me a little bit about ElectionBuddy, and how, not only sort of where this came from, but how it's kind of exploded now and changed for you.
Sure. Well, as background, ElectionBuddy is a simple to set up, high integrity, cloud-based voting platform that helps member-based organizations like professional associations, homeowners associations, unions, and universities manage board elections, motion approvals, contract ratifications, and bylaw amendments through its ability to send notice, record the vote, tally the results, and share the winners for both remote elections and on-site and virtual meetings like Zoom that you and I are meeting with today. You know, as background, I got started with ElectionBuddy through a chance meeting at something called Demo Camp. I clicked with the founder. We agreed to become co-founders and just said, look, let's figure out how we can put something out on the internet. And this is a while back, and kind of threw it out and used some of the concepts of FCO to let it grow. You know, we were super excited when we got our first $19 election, and you know, that was back in that time. But what really started to become apparent was people were looking for something that was simple. And the thing of running an election, whether it's a remote election or you're doing a meeting like we're doing, but you have motions as part of that meeting, is that relative to other problems, it was a problem that people could sort of solve themselves, but they needed that integrity to kind of get her done. But it wasn't so difficult. Like, the thing about registration is there's so many different paths. Like, we can limit the focus of ElectionBuddy, so it becomes truly a self-serve product, but the market's big enough, and it's niche enough that people can solve it themselves. It's big enough, you know, with the member-based organizations that I mentioned, we've got a pretty big growth pattern. You know, since March, you know, we were growing at a clip. Since March, with COVID hitting, prior to that, we were growing at a clip. It was growing kind of every year. So we started to grow at about 20%, went to 40% for a couple of years. And then last couple of years, we were growing at 70% per year. But when COVID hit, we grew 9x, like literally overnight, because people were trying to go back and say, man, we still got to run our business of our professional association, or ratify a contract for our union, or you know, religious organizations, churches. We're trying to figure, well, how do we conduct the business of the church? But we can't do it face to face, so we're going to have small cadres of people meeting, but we need to interconnect those folks, and they need to vote in a secure fashion on it. So, you know, for us, again, it was a little bit of luck, because we solved the meeting vote problem in February before COVID hit. So we had released, you know, we'd done about a year's worth of work on it, but we'd released a product to handle both, you know, the traditional remote elections, which were, voting in your federal and municipal government election. We don't do those kinds of elections. We're more focused on the member-based organizations, but the process, depending on what part of the country you are, it's kind of the same. With a meeting vote, you're in the midst of a meeting, you've got a bunch of people that are voting right away. They vote on something, they go to the next motion, and then they may make an amendment, or they may say, look, we need to add something. Like, you need to be a little bit more flexible, but they still need that high integrity, need to be able to vote. Well, we're one of the few companies that have solutions for both that actually tie into some of the remote technologies as well, like the virtual conferencing. And we'd had experience with all that through. So when COVID hit, we were lucky in terms of having the people, the technology was able to scale, but man, I've not experienced growth like this. Lots of folks talk about it. You hear about Slack, and you hear about Alta ML and some of their growth and a local success story. For them, it's natural. Well, in dealing with the K-12 market, you don't get 9x. Like, I never experienced 9x growth. Like, our best years were 300% for about 3 years. So all of a sudden, going from 70% to 9x, the technology helped up. So, learn some lessons to make sure that the platform was solid, because we wouldn't have had a reputation. And then, the ability to have the right people to be able to manage and qualify and change the processes on the fly and kind of get through it. That's been a ton of learning. And it's been, I ain't gonna lie, it's been stressful, but it's a much better problem to have than some of my brethren that's like, look, they've got no demand, and they're not sure how to get any, because the customer base that they're serving is done. Like, they're figuring out how to take advantage of the SERP stuff. So from our problem, we're really, really fortunate and really lucky, but we were also well timed, because with, and that's part of it is a little bit of luck and a little bit of planning, because, arguably there's a bunch of different things that could have occurred. I don't know, if the divestiture hadn't occurred, whether I would have taken advantage of this space too, or how that would have all been taken care of. So I'm feeling pretty fortunate most days, and good team and lots of growth, and it's fun to be able to talk about the next how this month was better than last, and it was better than the last, and it was better than the last. My wife says, well, every month's new record, stop talking to me about it. It's like, she's kidding, of course, but to a certain extent it becomes routine. But dealing with that level of growth for me it is stressful, and there's a bunch of problems, because you're trying to figure out, when you've got people that need help, how can you, and they're asking for help. Literally, we would have people beg us because they didn't know what they were going to do, and they needed to have a problem solved in 4 days. We had an organization in Nigeria that was running a member-based organization that literally their technology was failing because of the turnouts, and we were able to solve that in a 3-day turnaround. Well, now we figured out, we need a little bit more time than that, because the team needs to take a breather too. But certainly, if you take the aspect of figuring out how you're going to help those folks, and your team gets that empathy as part of their core DNA, they kind of figure out the right things to do. And for some, the team members that have been here a while, there's still some mentoring that goes on. But even though they're young and their experience, it's like we talk about COVID as being kind of COVID in an equation of dog years. We're learning the same amount in a quarter that before we would be learning in 18 to 24 months. So you're changing, you're articulating, you're moving, and it's a very, very, very different format. I don't know how the guys at Slack and some of those other crews did it, because this is all, I'm learning every day, but it's pretty fun.
Well, and it brings up, like, there's two really dangerous times in business in cash flow, and one of them is growth. Like, growth can be a challenge for your organization, for your management, for your processes, and also for your cash flow. And it's just a challenging time, but it's like you said, it's much better problem to have than the alternative. It's exciting though. It's exciting to see that you guys have hit that. And I did note that you come back to team. That is one of the, and empathy for your customer. And so a lot of the things that we talk about all the time with our team is, you have to have you're a small team as a startup. You have to have a bunch of superstars. You have to have a lot of empathy for your client. And then it's just a learning, learning from, it's like drinking from a fire hose, the proverbial drinking from a fire hose as you learn. That can be good, but of course can be, super challenging as well.
Well, and one of the things that I learned, especially from the ACE Tech and as part of their growth program, and then reading some stuff, Vern Hardish has a book called Scaling Up that's really, really good. I recommend it. But, getting those core values and really understanding what makes you go, and finding not people with the same skill set, but some of the same underlying values. We call ours the E-team values. So ethics is the heart of what we do, because we're doing elections, right? Like people have to trust in the process and have to trust the people for the stuff, tenacity, empathy, awesome sauce. One of my co-founders' favorite words kind of thing. So we had to have that one in, combining creativity with common sense to really solve some technology problems. And last but not least, motivation, right? If you've got people around that want to solve the problem, then stuff, and we carry that throughout our performance metrics, our management, our awards, our rewards, everything. And even it starts with our recruiting, making sure that they have some of those. Like if you don't have people that have a couple or three of those values within your set, and preferably 5, then they're not going to fit with inside your culture. They may be fantastic folks, but they're not going to fit us, right? And people, depending on the role that they're playing, they're going to have different strengths, and individuals have different strengths and weaknesses. And there's probably going to be one that they're best at. We just recruited a lady that her empathy skills are off the charts, right? Like to the point that our team is like, man, we got to pick up our game a little bit, right? Like, cause she's that good, but certainly, having some of that skill set and being able to galvanize around that, it just, then when you're in a tough situation, or the team is in a tough situation, they instinctively know what to do, because they can focus back on the core value, because there's going to be 100 different situations they're not going to. A very good friend of mine is, he's a hockey coach, and, you can learn stuff from that and apply that to your own business as well. I watched, he's a very good hockey coach, and he's had some success along the way, but he talks about teaching habits, not systems, right? And you'll build the systems inside your organization. We all do as tech guys, because it's like something that we rely on. But those habits, and finding people and training people and getting them understand how to build those things so they make the right decisions instinctually, even from guys' perspective, the fellow, the hockey person I mentioned, that's a universal thing. But it doesn't matter whether you're running a hockey team or you're running a team of like-minded individuals to solve a technology problem. That habits over systems. You're not worrying about, did they execute the right thing exactly the way you wanted? Ultimately, did they execute on that thing with the core values in mind? And if the answer is yes, well, great. They'll likely make the right decision 9 times out of 10. And for that 10th one, well, then you tweak things a little bit so they make that 10th one correct, right? And then you rely on the judgment and experience. And it's really helped our team, especially in these situations where you're faced with so many situations that you haven't experienced yet. Like every day is something new, right? So if you don't have some sort of value set to fall back onto and a platform to make those decisions and good habits to do it, you ain't gonna make it, right? And most days, some days, like I still think it's like, great growth, but man, what's gonna be like tomorrow, or what's gonna happen if we, we're taking advantage of all this growth, so we're staffing up. What happens after? Is it still going to be there? Like, how do you deal with that uncertainty? Because when it first started, people were saying, oh, this will be a quarter and we'll be going back to school in the fall. Well, there wasn't a lot of going back to school in the fall, right? Like it was just different. So
no, this is going to be a long haul, and even at some point coming out of the situation we're here, even just talking about habits, people's habits will have changed. Their acceptance of technology will have changed. Their expectations of how they do their job will have changed. And, things might swing back a touch here and there, but, the world has changed in a lot of ways permanently, and a lot of it for the better, so it's, as far as building these systems and, there's
you
a
bring
lot of
up a
things
good
happening
point,
there.
right? Because one of the trends that I see is not whether people are going to continue to do these remote Zoom meetings, because now it's become a habit, right? Like doing a Zoom is, as my lovely aunt says, who's in her late 70s, she's like, yeah, well, let's get on and do a FaceTime kind of thing. And if you would ask me that, 2 years ago, she's like, she's prepping, she's doing a bunch of stuff, and now she's just she's doing a FaceTime. Well, COVID's been a forcing function for many folks like that. The challenge is going to be is once this ends and vaccines get done and all that's taken care of, you're still going to have this expectation that people that can't make a face-to-face meeting are going to want to participate. And that's actually going to be, I think, going to be the real challenge, because now you've got half the people in the audience that want to be there, but you've got the other half that wants to live stream. And it's easier to kind of get everybody in a room and say, we're going to do it all this way. Or it's easy to do, relatively easy once you learn the mechanics, to get everybody on Zoom. Well, now you're going to have half on Zoom and you're going to have half in that meeting. And it's that, how do you make the experience engaging for both folks? And there's some really interesting people solving some of those problems too, right? Like we're doing a little bit of it, but some really cool technologies that are coming out to kind of take advantage of this multifaceted 4-person boardroom, but having 12 of those 4-person boardrooms together to be able to create that kind of engaging experience so that everybody feels like they're sitting across the table in all those spaces, right? Like, I think that's exciting. I think that's fantastic, but it's also challenging. It's opportunities for folks too, right?
Yeah, for sure. And innovation will definitely drive forward through this time. And it'll be interesting to look back 2-3 years from now and see how the world's changed and the types of innovation that have, changed with the culture and changes culture as well. This is great. Yeah, we've been talking for a while here. I guess we should, start to wrap it up, and people probably have to get back to work. So, they're listening to us here. But this was terrific. And just to wrap it up though, if people want to find your ElectionBuddy, how do they find you?
ElectionBuddy.com. Go and visit the site. If you want to see kind of what we do, you can check out our meeting solutions or check our remote voting solutions. Or if you just you got a question about entrepreneur stuff or whatever, I'd like to pay it forward for all the folks that have helped me out all along the way. And there've been many really, really good ones. So don't hesitate to reach out directly and just look for me on LinkedIn or send me an email message or something to that effect. And I'll as a fellow entrepreneur, I'll reach back. Though, as you probably get inundated with a bunch of different requests from a bunch of different folks that aren't fellow entrepreneurs kind of thing. It's more to support the ecosystem on that basis. So yeah, if you're a startup and you want to learn about how to, bootstrap or automate or those things and go from zero to 10 million kind of thing, that's been kind of my strength. But, if you're going from 10 to 200 or 10 to the unicorn size, there's some really smart folks. I'll point you to somebody else because that's probably outside my skill set. But for that bootstrap startup, I can probably give you a hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much, Dave. I know we had talked about how important it is for entrepreneurs to share their knowledge and talk to each other. And of course, so many of us love doing that, love talking with other entrepreneurs. And I'm sure some people take you up on that. And I definitely recommend it. Man, I can see my camera is getting darker here. The lights going down here. So I better wrap it up. But thanks so much, Dave. And just want to mention everyone, again, I'm CEO with Dryrun here. And if you're having some struggles with your cash flow management, want to get some processes in place, or your CPA is trying to help your clients through this tough time, please look us up at dryrun.com. And we'd love to chat with you. Thanks so much, everybody.